Happy Feast of the Ascension. For most people, the feast was moved to Sunday, although I don't know why. It's listed on the 1962 liturgical calendar as a holy day of obligation. Some dioceses may have it as a holy day of obligation. Still, others probably don't. You may want to check in on the website of your diocese if you have not heard, or go online to your parish and look up the previous week's parish bulletin. They'll let you know. But today's the actual Feast of the Ascension, and why it's kind of an odd time to talk about this. 7 months ago, almost to the day, it's May 9th, and so 7 months ago, almost to the day, the church in America learned that Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, had been forced into retirement by Francis, removed from his episcopal office. This had been an ongoing saga throughout all of 2023 due to an apostolic visitation and some other things, but it went into effect in November. And afterwards, since that time, we had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is what is going to happen to the traditional masses in Tyler, Texas, who is going to be appointed to run the diocese, all of those things. And for now, there's a neighboring bishop who does figure into this story that I'm going to tell you today, who is the sort of apostolic administrator, meaning he's still the bishop of his own diocese, but he's now also sort of running the Diocese of Tyler, although he's relying on local priests to do it. And they are key to this story. There's an official narrative about the story. We're going to go over it from the pillar, but the pillar, who usually does solid reporting, dropped the ball on this story. And I say that because I have my own source who gave me information from within the Diocese of Tyler itself that shows that something nefarious was happening. Because what ended up happening was, on Monday morning, I received an email from somebody in Tyler, Texas, telling me that I should be able to find the story online already. It wasn't published yet, so I couldn't. But they knew for a fact that the Veritas Splendor community there had just lost their traditional mass, and that the priests there had been kicked out for the diocese effectively, despite having done nothing wrong. And so we're going to go over the story because that's not how it's reported by the Pillar Catholic, and then I'm going to tell you why you should not trust the official reporting on this and who's likely responsible. So first, let's start with Pillar Catholic so you understand the basics of the story, while also wondering why it is that they reported it this way, because usually they're very solid, and I normally trust the reporting of the Pillar. But on this one, unfortunately, the information I have does not line up with what they're saying. So the headline is Veritatis Splendor, priests expected to leave the Tyler Diocese. Expected to leave. Okay, so they've actually been kicked out, basically. They haven't left yet, but they're leaving soon. You probably know about Veritatis Splendor. It was an attempt at starting this sort of Catholic community, practically starting its own town in Texas. And a lot of Catholics, a lot of conservative and traditional Catholics were all gung-ho about this, saying this is going to be great. A lot of us were just waiting for the hammer to be dropped on them from Rome, if not from the local secular authorities. Though in Texas, I kind of doubt the government would have cared. But for the local secular authorities, not so much, but Rome, definitely, the Vatican, to drop the hammer on them. And here it is. So here's the story. A group of priests associated with a controversial residential project in the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, is expected to leave the diocese as their efforts to reach a stable canonical status have faltered, according to sources close to the diocese. Bishop Joe Vasquez, apostolic administrator of the Tyler Diocese, met Monday morning with the board of Veritatis Splendor, a planned Catholic residential community in the diocese which has faced controversy involving its leadership's financial administration and personal conduct. According to sources close to the diocese, pay attention to that phrase there. I'm about to reveal who that source was. Vasquez told board members that an ongoing effort to establish an oratory of St. Philip Neri at the Veritatis Splendor Project's chapel has stalled, and that the 2 priests and 3 laymen associated with the project will be expected to return to their dioceses. So let's pause here. 3 laymen associated with the project. These are people who moved to Tyler to go work on this project, and they're being expected to return to their diocese, which means leave Tyler, Texas. That's interesting. I would question the ability of the diocese to order people to move out of their diocese. Laymen. I get it with priests, but laymen? Okay, then. The community apparently hasn't, quote, done things required of them to be established as an oratory. So the issue is just they're not an oratory and they don't appear on the path to become one. Again, a source close to the chancery told the pillar. They've known this was coming for a while and they've been looking for another diocese, but they haven't found a bishop who will take them, the source added. And then it goes into some background on this. Some of its leadership was embroiled in a scandal involving an extra sacramental relationship among its leaders, as well as allegations of financial misconduct. Again, 2020, we're talking here, tradition known as Custodes, right around that time. Not saying that sins don't happen among people who found such things. They can, especially among laity. Take it with a grain of salt, though. But they're building a whole community there. They were, that 75 lots built, 15 houses have been built, but 75 lots already planned. People called into question the viability, however, especially after Bishop Strickland was removed. That's the key marker here. He was a big supporter of this, building an actual Catholic community in that place. And interesting quote here. One of the main reasons why the founders of Veritas Splendor, chose East Texas and why they landed here was obviously Bishop Strickland. Bishop Strickland played a huge role in our decision, they said, just before Pope Francis's decision to remove him from office. All right, so let's talk about this for a second. And let's make sure I forgot to do that. So we make sure we get this on screen better next time. So it was relying on an anonymous source. Well, it turns out the anonymous source the pillar was using is probably Father Gomez, the Vicar General of the diocese. That's kind of a key detail here. The Vicar General basically runs the diocese on behalf of the bishop, who temporarily is running Tyler until a replacement for Strickland is made. Now, Strickland is one who appointed Father Gomez as the apostolic administrator. So my source messaged me of this information. They said that the pillar's reporting on this is sloppy because the pillar never reached out to what's called Pious House, that's the religious community in question, for comment. They never did. But here's what my source told me about the whole thing. Quote, just an FYI on this, I know for a fact that the clergy were kicked out for being brought in by Bishop Strickland and offering the Latin Mass, even though they had full permissions from Bishop Strickland on paper and signed at the chancery. The source in this article is Vicar General of Tyler himself, Father Gomez. He makes claims in the article that the Pious House didn't do anything right when in fact they had done all the proper steps and paperwork. The brothers were even sponsored by the diocese as seminarians. They're not just leaving, they were told that they would have to leave months ago. End quote. So who is this Father Gomez? He was initially picked by Bishop Strickland way back in 2015, 9 years ago, to help run the diocese. This comes from the Tyler Telegraph on this, which, to give you an idea of some of this. This is, again, an article from August of 2015, okay? So quoting it, 2 men have replaced one as the Vicars General for the Diocese of Tyler. Bishop Joseph E. Strickland appointed the Reverend Anthony McLaughlin and Reverend John Gomez to serve as the Vicars General for the Diocese of Tyler. The appointments were effective last month. The Vicars General will help the bishop govern the diocese, according to the Diocese of Tyler website. Typically, one priest serves as Vicar General, but the Catholic Church law allows a bishop to appoint more than one person to the role. Father McLaughlin and Father Gomez are well-respected priests who possess a set of gifts that will be of tremendous benefit to both me personally and to the clergy and faithful of the Diocese of Tyler, Bishop Strickland said, according to the diocese. I am pleased that they will be assisting me in the administration and governance of the diocese, and as trusted advisors. Let's remember that phrase. McLaughlin will oversee administration, including diocesan finances, business affairs, communication and development. He will also direct the operations and staff of the Chancery, which is the headquarters of the administration of the diocese. End quote. Remember, my source here gave me the information for within Tyler itself that the anonymous source for the pillar's reporting was Father Gomez, and that they never reached out, Pillar never did, to Pious House. That's the Veritas Splendor religious community. That was conveniently left out of that article was that Bishop Strickland already signed off on everything for them, meaning they, strictly speaking, would have had canonical status with everything except from permission from Rome. And there's kind of where your key on this, a lot of this hinges. remember, Traditionis Custodes said no to the establishment of any more traditional fraternities and things similar to them. And that was probably why they weren't getting canonical status. Now, you might be wondering, why does it matter who Father Gomez is? So we're going to go here to something else about Father Gomez. We're going to go take another trip back in the Wayback Machine here to June of last year. So from Catholic Vote, Vatican launches apostolic visitation of Bishop Joseph Strickland. Remember these days? You remember when that happened? I want you to remember something here. Bishop Strickland was removed because, according to the official documentation from Rome, their official public line, their statements said that he was removed because of his behavior on Twitter, but because also he had management issues for the diocese. The priest didn't trust him, that meant that people who worked in the chancery office didn't like his way of managing things. Remember that as we go through this. So I'm going to just quote this here because I don't want to read the whole thing. According to witnesses who requested anonymity because they are active in the life of the diocese, the Vicar General and moderator of the diocese's curia, the Very Reverend John Gomez, JCL, convened via phone and email several priests, religious, and lay people of Tyler to meet with the apostolic visitators appointed by the Vatican. Witnesses confirmed to Catholic Vote that the apostolic visitation is being led by Bishop Dennis J. Sullivan of Camden, New Jersey, and General Frederick Kikanis, retired Bishop of Tucson, Arizona, and former auxiliary bishop of Chicago, Illinois. Both bishops, accompanied by two priest experts in canon law from out of town, interviewed the witnesses about what they know regarding the personal life and pastoral activities of Bishop Strickland. The interviews took place under confidentiality at a Holiday Inn in downtown Tyler, and according to the witnesses, they were requested to sign non-disclosure agreements, something unusual in a canonical process. Catholic Vote reached out to one official at the diocese to confirm or deny the existence of the canonical process. The official declined to speak on record, stated that they were not at liberty to discuss the issue, and suggested contacting Father Gomez directly. End quote. So, to review, the Pillar Catholic used for their article, their reporting on this, the actual Vicar General as their anonymous source, who is helping the bishop who is temporarily running the diocese from his own diocese in the governing of the diocese. The same man who collected the priest, religious, and laity who testified against Bishop Strickland to the apostolic visitators. And he was their source for the story, claiming that they had done none of the things they needed to do to stay in Tyler, Texas, when Bishop Strickland had already signed off on all the things required to stay in the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. That's what happened here. Marie Catherine says, why not function outside the diocese? Who owns the land? I'm not sure who owns the land. If the diocese, then the land and operate independently, return to the diocese. If the land is not for sale, start again in another. I mean, there's a lot of problems with going independent, and part of it is most traditional priests align themselves with the Ecclesia Dei document that was issued by the Vatican in 1988 as a response to Archbishop Lefebvre's quote-unquote illicit consecration of bishops for the Society of St. Pius X. Back in those days, they said Lefebvre incurred automatic excommunication for what he had done, which in the history of the church that's a novelty, because it used to be that bishops didn't need to have the permission of Rome to be consecrated. In fact, it wasn't until the current Code of Canon Law that they changed that in an effort to stop Archbishop Lefebvre. Plus, there's a lot of things about his excommunication that are widely considered to be dubious by canon law experts. But Ecclesia Dei was a document issued in response to that. And the FSSP were born from it, as were most of the other ones that you can think of. And, this is how you started getting your diocesan Latin masses and things. And outside the SSPX, most Latin masses are offered in the spirit of Ecclesia Dei, which rather stresses heavily communion with the papacy. And so priests from that relationship, from that document, are not going to necessarily want to go independent. They usually have to be outright canceled for that to happen. And again, they're sending these guys, quote, back to their diocese, even though, let me go back to my statement I gave you here. that that the brothers were even sponsored by the Diocese of Seminarians. These the priests there. They were sent to this. They were sponsored by the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, under Strickland, to be seminarians. They had the official approval of Bishop Strickland. They were educated there by him. They had done everything, according to my source, signed off by Bishop Strickland. It was just a matter of time until the hammer came down on them. So the idea that they're going to go independent is unlikely. They could potentially reach out to like the Coalition for Canceled Priests or Exsurge Domine, which is Archbishop Vigano's organization. There are others out there. They could try to do that, but that becomes extremely hazardous. You're talking about people who are essentially priests who are offering masses in people's houses and barns and, in their businesses after business operations have closed. We're talking late 60s, early 70s era, recognize and resist type stuff going on with them, the way the SSPX and other independent priests back in that era were offering masses. And a lot of them won't do it. It's just as simple as that. But that's my source on this, is saying, and when you put all the pieces together about who this is, it actually makes sense, because the entire reason for getting rid of Bishop Strickland was on its face dubious. But when you look at who organized that, and then when you look at who organized this, you start to see a pattern here. We don't know who the bishop is going to be in Tyler, Texas. We don't know it yet. We will definitely be focusing on all that, though, like here and the other commentary channels, I'm sure. Well, as soon as that is announced, we're going to all dig in to see who this person is. Sort of like the bishop who replaced Bishop Sticka, who appears to be a Bergoglian of some kind himself. WM says the rules are only enforced on the people they don't like. That's generally the case. Again, Traditionis Custodes hangs over all of this. It's the sort of Damocles hanging over all of this. They probably couldn't get their official recognition from Rome because of Traditionis Custodes. You cannot start a new traditional organization right now, but you're just not permitted to. Somebody trying to found one with a good bishop, the bishop may give them permission to do things in the diocese, but he can't, they can't be officially recognized by him or anybody, because there's clearly an attempt to wait out Francis happening right now. I just don't know how long they're going to be waiting, because his successor may be just as bad, at least on the liturgy. Small Rail says, feel bad because my priest was given special permission by his bishop to offer the traditional Ascension Mass. Want to support this good priest and receive our Lord. Again, you're going to see more stories like this. Remember, I've warned people about this before. We are now 3 years, almost to the day, since Traditionis Custodes was issued. 3 years ago, on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which was in July 15th, Traditionis Custodes was issued. And a lot of dioceses requested extensions for figuring out how to implement things, or they had a large number of traditional Catholics there, and maybe the SSPX had a presence, and so they didn't want them going there. And so the Vatican gave them extensions of 2 or 3 years, with the understanding that they have to work on getting their traditional Catholics to come to the light and see how wonderful the Novus Ordo is. And now, starting last year, you started seeing a whole new wave of closures of traditional parishes, or the removal of traditional mass offerings. In addition to all the other restrictions of start happening in other dioceses again. And we can just add to the list. We're in the enforcement phase of Traditionis Custodes, which is probably why you never got a real follow-up to Traditionis Custodes, despite solid sources in Rome among Catholic journalists reporting that Archbishop Roche, or Cardinal Roche, the architect of Traditionis Custodes, actually presented Francis with a follow-up document, and Francis told him he wasn't interested because the Traditionis Custodes hadn't even been enforced yet. But we're now in the enforcement stage, and this group of priests is the next casualties of Traditionis Custodes. That's what they are. You add them to that list, and at the hands of what looks like either a Bergoglian bishop or priest in this case, or at the very least someone who, and I understand why some priests and some bishops come to this conclusion, They acknowledge Francis as Pope. They may not like a single thing he does, but they still obey and implement his will because they believe they are due to give obedience to and submission of will to him. I totally understand why they think that. Even if they don't like anything he does, I just don't understand exactly how you square it, but I understand the basics of it. Marie Catherine says it's up to individuals. Some priests are okay with going independent. Others would not care about being given diocesan permission. That's, yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, there's plenty of independent priests out there now because of this. WM says, my priest complains about gluten in the communion wafers online. Bro doesn't believe in transubstantiation. There are bishops and priests who have publicly denied transubstantiation, which makes me wonder why they're still being allowed to offer mass. Jessela says, I think Spain needs some kind of exsurge domine. Priests are being persecuted also, but they're not still at the level of accepting being kicked out and continue to obey bad bishops. Yeah, you're seeing attempts to take down Vigano in the public eye, to discredit him. There was Vigano said something pretty spicy about a chrism mass in America, and that bishop issued some just scathing document and go, oh, he's a schismatic and a heretic, yada yada yada. It was so trite that it wasn't even worth reporting on. But exsurge domine is predominantly in the United States and Italy. If they get more funding, more resources, they could. But there are people who have questions about what they're doing too. So, but in general, I do think there needs to be more support for these independent priests because they are, even for canceled priests who are dedicated to tradition, because there's a growing number of them. Summorum Pontificum had one effect, and it reawakened a love of tradition in people who, especially clergy, who may have never even thought about it, because their lay people came to them and said, can we have the traditional mass? And the priest says, give me X amount of time to learn how to do it, and I will offer it for you. And then they learned how to do it, and then they fell in love with the mass. And now many of them, because they fell in love with the same liturgy that developed organically, basically since apostolic times, because they have a love of the Catholic liturgy, they are being canceled. And now here's just the latest group of it. Based on one of Anthony's comments in his video on Marian apparition, I just looked at Pius X's vision of the future. Yeah, you should. I did a video on that once. It's very similar to the what I think is the fake Third Secret of Fatima, the one they released. Almost to the point where I think they just lifted it. That's not saying it's not valid in terms, because it came from Pius X. He had himself his own prophetic vision, but I don't think it's the Third Secret of Fatima, especially based on everything we know about the Third Secret of Fatima. WM says basically the best way to deal with Vigano is to ignore him. Canceling him will make him bigger. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the Streisand effect, basically, right? If you don't know what the Streisand effect is, we're hearing that term thrown around a lot these days. But back in like the early 2000s, Barbara Streisand got upset when somebody published pictures of her home online, and she tried to get, I think, Google to take the pictures down. And all it did is make people want to go look at the pictures of her house, right? That's the Streisand effect. The more you complain about something, the more you actually elevate it. You're seeing that in American politics right now, by the way, with what's going on. People who don't like the once and future head of state were almost suddenly liking him because he had made all the right enemies. But yeah, we're going to keep this one basically short today. So if anybody has any final thoughts on what I just told you here, that it looks very much like that the anonymous source that the Pillar was using for the official line about the shutting down of Veritas Splendor was the actual Vicar General of the Diocese of Tyler, which is kind of a big deal. Should have been noted. And that in general, it looks like he was the one who also orchestrated the ouster of Bishop Strickland. Kind of a big deal. Weird that people haven't mentioned it. Also, if you haven't hit like yet on this, please do so. We have the, all the wonderful people who, for whatever reason, waste their time watching me, who don't like what I do here, have chimed in. So please hit the like button if you have not. Damien Keller says, Vigano had a real good presentation on Dr. Maz's video. I remember him also giving a presentation at their conference and basically kind of disagreeing with them on being able to declare someone is Pope or not. WM says we are in Akita world now. I hope not. Remember the timetable that aligns with the King of France statement in the message Sister Lucia got. looks like it's coming up here in about 5 to 7 years. So I kind of hope we're not in there. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today and for the kind words in the chat and the prayers. Please pray for the priest of this story, including Father Gomez and everybody else. Remember, if anything we report on here stirs up negative feelings towards a figure that we're talking about, please say a prayer for them. It's the most charitable thing you can do. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.